Welcome to the MI Hunting Podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Cody Norton, the large carnivore specialist for the Michigan DNR, and we're going to be discussing wolves and the relisting of gray wolves to the endangered species list. Yes, on this episode, we're talking the gray wolves and the status of the gray wolf here in the lower 48. But before we dive into that, I do want to give an update or cover some upcoming events that will be taking place. So the first one is a turkey hunting seminar that will be held at the Kingsley Sportsman Club in Kingsley, Michigan. And that will be hosted by the Northwest Michigan NDA branch. And that will be on Saturday, April 9th from 9 to 11 a.m. And then also on April 9th, the Michigan Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation Traverse Bay chapter is hosting their 26th annual banquet. And again, that's on April 9th, and that will be starting at 5 p.m. at the Park Place Hotel and Conference Center in Traverse City, Michigan. No, and last I checked, they still had some tickets available, so I will put a link down in the description. If you're interested, look up and see if there's any tickets available, and you can purchase those. And then lastly, but certainly not least, on Saturday, April 16th, from 3 to 9 p.m. at the Upper Hand Brewery in Escanaba, Michigan, they're releasing Trek Light, and that's with Trekking Outdoors. So it looks like they've partnered up, and the guys with Trekking end up getting, looks like their own beer. So again, that will be on April 16th from 3 to 9 p.m. in Escanaba at the Upper Hand Brewery. So those are a few events that I'm hoping to attend as well. So if you're in the area, I do hope to see you there. But now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this conversation. So to give some, kind of outline, what this is all about. So there's been a few changes in really the past year or so of the status of gray wolves and how they're managed throughout the country. So in September of 2020, the Fish and Wildlife announced that gray wolves would no longer be federally protected in the lower 48, which in January of 2021, that ruling went into effect. And of course, litigation was quickly filed. So on February 10th of 2022, District Court Judge Jeffrey White of the Northern District of California ruled in favor to return wolves in the lower 48 back onto protected status under the endangered species list. And this litigation was brought on by the Defenders of Wildlife, Natural Resources Defense Council, and Wild Earth Guardians, who filed the suit seeking to overturn the ruling of the delisting. So that gives the basis on the status of the gray wolf. There's been a lot of news about wolves, and there's been a lot of work in regards to, at least in the state of Michigan, of how to handle or their management plan for wolves. So, and with all these changes, I sought to get someone that would, or get an expert on the subject to come on the show and talk about. So I reached out to Cody Norton, who is the large carnivore specialist for Michigan. And I just wanted to have him have an opportunity to, speak on the matter, and then, kind of talk about wolves and, the management of wolves within the state. So I'm not going to hold it up anymore. We're going to turn it over, and then I'll follow up after that conversation with a bit of a closure and some additional updates.
So yeah, I'm Cody Norton. I'm the large carnivore specialist for the Michigan DNR's Wildlife Division. So I'm responsible for bear, wolf, and cougar management in the state. It's kind of it's an interesting job. I've been doing it for just under 3 years now. Before that, I was a wildlife biologist in Shingleton here in the Upper Peninsula. Now I'm over in Marquette, which is where I'm actually from. And before that, I worked on a lot of different, research projects with bears, wolves, bobcats, coyotes, deer, kind of, a lot of different things that helped me, build my background for getting into a position like this and dealing with things at a kind of a much higher level.
Okay. Yeah. With you just saying that, I was just going to ask what steered you in the direction to go towards the large carnivores?
Yeah, I guess, I've just kind of always had a thing for, especially bears. They're kind of my favorite species to work on. I ended up doing my master's at Northern Michigan University on bears, collaring bears, following them around, seeing how they responded to timber harvest and other factors. And so that really kind of led me, I guess, down this road. That's what a lot of my background was in, including, working with wolves. And then cougars were kind of a newer thing for me once I got into this position. Kind of soon after, I actually got to go out to Idaho and got to run cougars, or lions as they call them out there, with hounds and dart them and collar them. So that was pretty awesome, getting to do some hands-on experience. And with them, obviously there's a lot of similarities between them and our other carnivores here in Michigan, but some pretty big differences too. So it's been a fun ride so far.
Yeah. Okay. So you said you're partial to the bears, though, huh?
Yeah, they definitely. They're a lot of fun to work with. Obviously, management's been kind of set for a long time with how we manage bears, our approach to them. I grew up hunting, trapping, doing everything I could out in the woods. So I really enjoyed, interacting, hunting bears that way, as well as doing research on them and then managing them once I was, with the department. So.
Okay, excellent. Again, the main reason why I've got you on is to talk about the wolves. And, I'm sure one of the first things that if I didn't cover it, it would be asked why I didn't cover it. But I guess if you could cover about, what the wolf population looks like in Michigan, the area that they cover, and just kind of the summary on wolves in Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. And, wolves are a native species in Michigan. They've been here since, I think, the last glacier melted 10,000 years ago. Obviously, they were mostly extirpated from the state, by the late 60s, early 70s. But since the late 80s, when we saw a few wolves show up in the central UP and then start reproducing, we've had an increasing population until about 10 or 11 years ago. And we've actually seen that population stabilize. So our most recent minimum population estimate was 695 wolves. That was in 2020. We're actually conducting our another survey this winter, so we should have a 2022 estimate sometime late spring, early summer. But over, like I said, the last 10 or so years, that population has stabilized. We haven't seen growth. We haven't seen, a decline at all. They've kind of filled the entire Upper Peninsula. They're well distributed across it. They seem to have kind of hit their, ecological or biological and social carrying capacity. Okay.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because that was one of the questions I had lower on my notes, is that, doing some research on wolves and whatnot, some of the arguments is that, that wolves will, essentially start to maintain their numbers once they've hit the, carrying capacity for the area. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, how much truth is that? Will they start to level off and overseed the carrying capacity and then drop back down, or is it a much more subtle, transition in that regard?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I guess there are examples outside of the U.S. Within the U.S., it's a little bit more limited, and really good examples of where wolves have kind of hit, that carrying capacity, and where we've seen populations stabilize without, any other mortality sources being thrown in there. I think Isle Royale is a really neat example of what can happen. We've seen wolves on that island kind of exceed carrying capacity, or what the habitat space what they need a certain amount of area for, their territories as well. They'll actually, kill other wolves and compete with each other for what food is available. But it's definitely not a nice clean cut. Oh, they gently get up to this level and then stabilize over time. You can definitely have them, exceed or exceed and then kind of dip below, what that carrying capacity might be over time. But typically, you could expect any species that runs out of or kind of maximizes how many animals can be supported by, the land mass that's available, the prey base that's available, to stabilize over time and kind of hit that carrying capacity. Obviously, if you change the habitat that's out there, prey populations that are out there, different mortality sources that are acting upon that population, you can change, what that carrying capacity might be. But I think, we certainly didn't see UP wolves really peak and then come back down to where they've stabilized. They did just kind of, we saw an increasing trend all the way since the late 80s, and then them start stabilizing, back in, I think, 2011 was the last estimate that's been pretty consistent with what we've seen the last 10 years. So it's definitely not a nice clean cut, every population does this, but as you might expect with any wildlife species in a given area, there's only so many that are going to be able to be supported by the resources that are available.
Gotcha. And then for the distribution across the UP, are they dispersed across the entire portion?
Yes. Yep. So they're across the entire UP for the vast majority of potential areas where we think a wolf territory could be set up or be established. There's the number of packs hasn't changed much over time. The territories have been pretty consistent over time, in recent years. So we don't expect, wolves to be moving into many new areas. They've kind of, they've distributed themselves across the peninsula. It sure seems like in recent years, based on our surveys, that we've seen a little bit more of an increase in the eastern end of the UP and a decrease or kind of stabilization of the west end. The Keweenaw Peninsula was one of the kind of the last areas to have a wolf pack established up in the tip there. But we also have lower deer densities in some of those areas, right? So, how much prey base is actually there for pack to get established and be supported throughout the year. So, but yeah, in general, definitely wolves have expanded and kind of filled in the available habitat in the UP.
Gotcha. And then for the Lower Peninsula, now there are reports you hear every now and then of wolves being in the Lower Peninsula. Is there any confirmed population of wolves in the Lower Peninsula yet, or not yet?
There's no confirmed population, so we've never documented reproduction or breeding or anything like that. We have had 2 confirmed, wolf sightings or wolf reports from the northern lower over the years. The first one was in 2004. It was actually a collared wolf from, I think, Mackinac County in the UP. So our DNR biologist had collared it, and it ended up crossing the ice and got trapped by a coyote trapper in Presqu'île County, and in the northeastern Lower Peninsula. But that trapper shot it in the trap, apparently before he realized what it was. But that was actually the first verified wolf report in the Lower Peninsula since like 1910, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Obviously that one didn't, reproduce or become established in any way. And then 10 years later, the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians ended up getting trail cam photos of what they suspected were, I believe, 2 wolves, and then ended up collecting a scat sample that they sent off for genetic analysis, and that was confirmed to be from a wolf in Emmett County. So 10 years later, we had another confirmed sighting. Those are actually the only 2 confirmations that we've had in the northern Lower Peninsula. Yeah, so far.
And then what's the likelihood of a population of wolves getting established in the Lower Peninsula?
Yeah, I think if you look at the habitat, the prey base, it's absolutely suitable habitat for them. obviously they've got a kind of a 5-mile stretch of lake that they got to get past to get down there and try to become established. Some of the recent years, we haven't had the best ice cover, but you don't have to go back that far. I mean, the winters of 2012, 2013, we had some pretty severe winters up here, really cold, really cold, where basically all of Lake Superior froze over even. So there's definitely been opportunities for wolves to cross. We just haven't really seen multiple wolves get across where they could actually, reproduce with each other and establish a population. But there's, besides that, stretch of water they get across, there aren't really any big barriers to them getting there, and it sure seems like that could be, a possibility in the future.
Okay. All right. And then, so you did touch base a little bit about, the game species and whatnot that the wolves hunt, and, that's always a big concern, the, predation of game animals, with the wolf population. And I know, there's a couple different reports I've seen from like Wisconsin and Minnesota, where they're doing some, numbers in regards to number of deer, in Wisconsin in correlation to the number of wolves. They've seen the increase in the wolf population and decrease in the deer population, primarily in the northern regions. And then with the concern of moose in Minnesota, it looks like wolves are the primary cause of the majority of the mortality for moose calves. Are we seeing any figures of seeing declines in game species because of the wolf population?
Sure. So before I worked for the state, I actually worked on a research project called the Michigan Predator Prey Study. So that was going on in the UP for about 12 years. And kind of the big goal of that project was to evaluate the impact of winter weather, habitat, and predators on deer abundance, or deer populations, fawn survival in the UP. And kind of the big conclusions that came out of it was that up here in the UP, winter weather is really what drives deer populations. So we did find, wolves were the number one predator mortality source for adult deer, not for fawns, which is kind of interesting and fun to talk about. There's actually just kind of trade-offs between coyotes are typically the number one predator, and then bear and bobcat take quite a few fawns as well. But what we saw was that during severe winters, wolf predation, increased, and I think close to half of the deer that wolves would kill, especially during those severe winters, were likely, so far down on their fat reserves and in such poor condition that they might not have made it through the winter, regardless. So definitely, wolves kill deer. Wolves make a living off of deer. That's their main prey source. But what we found in the UP, when we see these big swings in deer population and deer abundance trends over time, it's being driven by those severe winters, and not as much by actual predation from the different predators that take them.
Gotcha. So with a lot of people are concerned about the deer numbers in the UP. How much of that, with that concern, has to be also taken consideration when you're talking with the wolf predation as well? It kind of sounded like you were saying that a lot of the deer that the wolves are killing were ones that may not have made it through winter anyways. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly see that. Obviously, they are taking, deer that are also healthy, and that might have otherwise made it through. So they certainly have an impact. They might, exacerbate slightly when we have, severe winters, or during winters in general. They're going to take deer that would otherwise have made it through. But we don't really see large population level impacts from wolf predation on deer. Like I said, when we see those big swings, in deer harvest, we don't have direct estimates of deer abundance in most of the UP. But when we see those big swings in our index of deer abundance, it's due to those, or driven by those severe winters.
Gotcha. Okay. And I guess since we're still on the wolf numbers, I do want to touch on, so in reading through the wolf management plan, and talking about the viability of a wolf population, in it is stated that a population of at least 200 wolves believed to be large enough to maintain a viable population with enough diversity to where it could essentially sustain itself. Is that number of 200 still accurate?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's outlined in our plan. That was mostly established based off of the federal wolf recovery goals. So in order for federal delisting, one of the criteria was that wolf numbers in Michigan and Wisconsin combined needed to be over 100 individuals. And so then the state, kind of tried to take a conservative approach and basically double that just in Michigan, and say that, okay, we'll consider our population to be, sustainable and at least considered for recovery after 5 consecutive years of a population over 200. And so we actually met, that federal recovery goal for Michigan and Wisconsin having over 100 wolves was met in 1994. And then the state recovery goal of having 200 for 5 consecutive years was met in 2004. And they were actually removed from the state list of threatened and endangered. They actually got reclassified in the middle there, but they were removed from the state list in 2009. So they are not a state endangered species. They're actually designated as a game species in Michigan. The Natural Resources Commission has designated them a game species. So they are not, protected at the state level in that way. They aren't considered an endangered species or threatened species. So when we talk about the Endangered Species Act and federal protections, that's only coming from the federal Endangered Species Act, not from those state designations of endangered or threatened.
No, and you just brought up a great point. Yeah, that was something that I really didn't realize, that there would be two different aspects of that, both on the federal level, which everybody knows, but then also that, yes, states can actually designate certain animals, regardless if they're under federal protection or not. It's great that you brought that up, that the state does see them as a game species or a game animal, but now they carry that federal protection.
Yes, yep. And that's, from the department's perspective, like you said, we're above federal and state recovery goals and have been for many years. So we, consider our wolf population recovered. It's a viable population, and it, here in Michigan doesn't warrant that federal protection or to be on the endangered species list. We would like to see wolves, stay under state management.
Right, and I assume that'd be the case, because I've never heard of any of the states that don't want control over the their own resources or animal resources or game species. So I assume that'd be the case. In regards to when they were taken off when they were delisted back in 2020. I believe it was 2020. Now I'm actually losing my
it would have been just in January 4th, 2021. I think I just was reviewing that today.
Yeah, so, in that regard, was that part of the reason why the state was trying to go through and do the survey for the wolf management plan, to do an update on it, to potentially, make the changes due to the no longer being federally protected?
Yeah, so our wolf management plan, was originally written back in 2008 and then updated in 2015. And the original wolf roundtable that kind of helped develop the plan, they actually had put a recommendation in there to update the plan every 5 years. And so with wolves, coming off of the list, coming back under state management, and us being kind of at that, about 5 year interval, we thought, this would be, an appropriate time to go through and update the management plan, which involved, different, public input and things I think that you brought up earlier as well.
Okay. So in with that, and then of course now with the overturning of that ruling, and having them put back on the endangered species act, how much does that affect what the plan was going forward with the new management plan?
Sure. So I think the outcome of our management plan, how it's written, will probably be the same regardless of the federal classification of wolves or standing of wolves. But it with them once again, so on February 10th of this year, last month, they were returned to the federal endangered species list. So that means that some of our management options that are outlined in the plan are no longer available to us as a management tool. So there's also some like state laws and other things that provide the ability of members of the public to do things as well. And so all of that kind of revolves around lethal management of wolves, right? So we can still implement most of the portions of the management plan. We can do non-lethal, livestock depredation management. We can still do our population estimates. We still do, active research on wolves. We can still do a lot of, other things that are in that plan. But anything involving, lethal control of wolves is off the table, unless they come back off the Endangered Species Act. So, some of those things that I think are important for folks to know, especially if, you're a dog hunter or dog owner or, a livestock producer, there's a couple public acts, 318 of 2008 and 290 of 2008 that allow either a dog owner to kill a wolf in the act of attacking their dog, or a livestock owner to kill a wolf in the act of attacking their livestock. Those become, they are no longer in place because wolves are back under federal protections. It also, if we have a livestock producer that's having issues, we can't, the department or USDA Wildlife Services that we use or work with a lot to deal with, depredation issues with wolves and other species. We can't go there and lethally remove any animals. And then we also typically would issue livestock producer control permits if there's a farmer that's experiencing wolf depredation, or somebody nearby that has livestock that could potentially be, at risk. There's kind of different criteria to qualify for them, but we could issue those to, livestock producers to take a certain amount of wolves off their property, if they've been causing issues. And then kind of the final thing is that we it's not an option for us to even, consider having some sort of, public harvest.
Right. Yeah. Because I was going to touch base on that about, what that means. So from what I read too, is that, if it's livestock or, in dealing with domestic animals at all, you're essentially non-lethal. It looked like the only time that lethal use is allowed is if it involves human life, essentially.
Yes. Yep. That's exactly it.
So now with that, it does seem like, taking the state's ability to, handle their own population in that regard, is there anything that the state can try to do to, go against this ruling, to maybe appeal it or basically to try to get control back of, being able to manage the populations themselves?
Sure. So, when the initial, rule was out for public comment before U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service actually, delisted wolves back in last January, we did provide a letter of support for delisting in Michigan. Obviously we're just going to comment on what's going on in our state, not, other states that may or may not have wolves. So, we have tried to be supportive in that way. Typically, any decisions about the department becoming involved with, appeals or the legal process, anything like that are made well above my head.
Sure.
So yeah. I'm not sure, if that will be something that gets looked at here in the future. Now that this federal court ruling came out, which put wolves back on the list. I have read the the judgment by that federal judge on the court case, and I think there were quite a few things that he picked out that he felt the Fish and Wildlife Service didn't properly address. So I'm not sure if an appeal would be. I'm not sure how effective it would be, I guess, and that's for something for people that understand the legal system much better than me as well.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think that's something that a lot of different groups, hunting groups, other conservation organizations, they're all looking at that and trying to weigh the options of what might be an effective strategy. But that's something that typically the department kind of stays neutral on, unless there's a really clear good option to move forward with.
Okay. Yeah, I had I suspected that was going to be something that wouldn't be necessarily your realm, but I thought maybe you had a thought on it. So I guess the one thing that I did kind of forget to touch base on. So with the wolf population, especially again now with the federal protection, it does change things. But a lot of people, I'm sure you probably get this question quite often, is how many wolves does the state want, or how many wolves will the state allow to be on the landscape? Because I know that the management plan has a minimum number, but is there any idea of a maximum number that the state thinks that should maintain, or is it still up in the air in that regard? Sure.
So, and I think that's an important thing too. When we talked earlier about that, it appears that wolves have stabilized, that doesn't mean that that's the, based on all input from different stakeholders, everyone from hunters to animal rights, activists, to the general public that's out there that doesn't, might not be as directly impacted by wolves. I mean, there's a lot of different, social interest and pressure for different levels of wolves. So just because they've stabilized doesn't mean that erases any need for any types of management or anything like that. I guess just hopefully that helps kind of put that into perspective. But the department, we do not, like you said, we don't have a goal or maximum population level that we want to manage for in our management plan. That's kind of by design. I think especially when the plan was written back in 2008, I don't think we could have put a pinpoint on where wolves would stabilize. You can try to make educated guesses for what that's going to look like, but we get new information, every year. It's important to kind of have a plan that's going to stand up over time and be adaptable and be relevant in the future as things change. But I think in general and how our plan is laid out is we're trying to, facilitate wolf-related benefits and minimize wolf-related conflicts. So I think, it's less important to us the actual number of wolves out there. It's more, how are those wolves impacting the people that live in Michigan in a good or a positive or negative way. So are there enough wolves out there that people who want to go out and listen to wolves howl or see wolf tracks or know that they're out there or whatever it might be can have those benefits? But also are there not so many wolves that we're seeing unacceptable levels of livestock depredation or hunting dog depredation, or potential issues with where we're concerned about human safety. So we have really tried to frame this and try to focus on trying to provide for those benefits of having wolves on the landscape, but minimize conflicts, rather than on just a one number, one population level that we want to manage for. Okay. Yeah. Again, be able to really give a definite number, because that, even just reading through that management plan, certainly that seems to be the case of is a much bigger document than I initially would have thought, and when I first read through it, and that basically, like you said, it covers how to deal with the social side of it, dealing with, like you said, the different interest groups, and dealing with livestock,
like you said, domestic animals and everything, like it covers all that and kind of a guideline of how to, address all those areas. So I would see definitely that's hard to pinpoint exact number, but just refer to, hey, if this situation is happening, this is what the management plan says and how we can deal with it. So
sure, absolutely. I think kind of maybe an example of that is we can have a certain amount of a high level of bears in a certain part of the UP, and we'll have almost no negative issues. Like in the Amasa unit, we've got high levels of bears. We don't see we see absolutely minimal nuisance complaints that come through every year. But then you take a way smaller or similar number of bears and put them in the northern 3 counties of the Baldwin unit in the northern Lower Peninsula, and you'll have an astronomical number of nuisance issues. So it really depends on context and where people are, and if you're able to effectively address those nuisance issues, you might be able to have more or less of a species on the landscape, and so I think that's kind of why we're less hung up on an actual number and more on what are the actual impacts from having wolves out on the landscape at different levels.
Okay. Yeah. Again, that if people really wanted to know, I would just say go ahead and read through the management plan. That's going to answer a lot of those questions for you, because there's a lot to it. And
yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty comprehensive document. Everything from diseases to research to depredation, all over the board. We try to kind of address those and make sure that we can manage all aspects of wolves, not just one or two
sure.
components.
And then since we're on the wolf management plan, have we gotten or have you seen the results, or are the results available from that survey yet?
Yeah, so that was the first public comment period. I assume you're talking about that kind of month-long public comment period that we sent out an online survey to fill out?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, so that's the first one. So that's on our current 2015 plan. And then once we have a draft updated plan based in part on those comments, we'll put that out for another public comment period as well. I believe we got around 5,000 respondents to that survey. So quite a few. To put that into context, when we did this for our bear management plan last fall, I think we had 300 and some. So wolves definitely, kind of bring people out. They show up, they want to be engaged, they want to provide input, and a very, a wider range of stakeholders, or a more diverse set of stakeholders than we typically get with bears or, coyotes or whatever we're talking about, other species in the state. So we definitely have, we've been working on, and I think we just completed going through all the written comments. Obviously, 5,000 times all the different questions adds up in a hurry. So we're trying to, kind of get through those and figure out what the implications, what the big, common themes are, and how to incorporate those into the management plan. So that's something that we haven't, gotten that actually incorporated into an updated draft to send out yet. So that's something we're working on. But we're also waiting on a public attitude survey. I'm not sure if you've heard about that at all yet, but
no.
We're working on with Michigan. Okay. Yeah. We're working with Michigan State University to do, it's actually like a scientific survey, of the general public in the UP Northern Lower and Southern Lower. So broken down by region that they live in, as well as deer hunters, fur takers, and livestock producers. So kind of trying to be able to estimate and represent the attitudes towards wolves or perspectives on wolves from people that live in those regions or belong to those different stakeholder groups that might be more directly impacted by wolves. So that is I think going to be a really important piece to include in the plan. We've done it in the past. The last time we did it, I think, was in 2005, and we had done it previous to that as well. So it's been really neat to kind of look at that over time. We get some really good information on, what different management techniques might be acceptable to the public and for what reasons. So yeah, that'll be really important results. They're almost finalized. I think actually at the next Wolf Management Advisory Council meeting, Emily Pomeranz from the Michigan DNR will be presenting the final results from that study. So that'll be in next month in April.
Okay.
And then, yeah, we also have a white paper that accompanies and informs the plan. So we call it the white paper. It's actually titled "A Review of Biological and Social Science Relevant to Wolf Management in Michigan." So basically, it's like a very comprehensive literature review of all the relevant science that's out there on wolves and wolf management that could be useful for us when we're making management decisions and updating the management plan. That is almost kind of nearing completion as well. So once we have those, as well as the public comment results, and we've also been consulting with tribal governments in Michigan and working with our Wolf Management Advisory Council that I mentioned, who will be providing kind of a list of recommendations. I believe in May will be the last month that they meet anyway, so it should be coming out soon after that. Then we'll kind of have all the pieces together to be able to put together a draft and then finalize the management plan. But it's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of information, and input from the public to try to incorporate and put together into an updated plan. So it's been it's a big lift.
Yeah. Okay. And then I didn't catch. Was there a estimated time when that updated plan would be out then?
So the goal is by the end of June. We're going to try to meet that. There's definitely been some some delays along the way, especially working with outside partners to conduct different parts of this. Not their fault at all, but just with trying to communicate between an agency and other organizations and get agreements in place to share information and all of that stuff. It's definitely been a process, but that's kind of the goal that was set out at the beginning of updating the plan.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So I'm definitely eager to take a look at that plan and whatnot when it comes out. So I'll definitely have that on my calendar to be on the look for it. So
yeah. Oh, I appreciate you actually reading through it too, because I think most folks don't, and you can tell, you get comments for you should include this in the plan or that in the plan or take this out, and it's interesting, I mean, a lot of folks, of course, I mean, it's a big document. I think with all the attachments and stuff, I think it's at least over about 100 pages, so it's pretty hefty to get through for sure.
yeah, and it's not an easy read because it goes over like history, research. You're just like, oh my goodness, okay, like what? Yeah. When do we get to something that's a little bit easier here? But yeah, no. Yep. So yeah, like I said, it's a good thing, especially if anyone has any questions on wolves. I mean, outside from talking to someone like yourself, that's the place that would turn people to see what the state stance is, or how they want to go about information on it all, because it's quite extensive for sure. That's pretty much all that I really had to cover, or at least from my notes that I wanted to touch base with you on. But is there anything else that we might not have covered that you think that people should know or want to highlight? I
guess I could touch on, we talked about our wolf population estimates, and I mentioned that they're a minimum population estimate, so we conduct those they're basically a track survey in the winter. And so we've been doing it the same way with some little tweaks along the way since the late 80s when we first had 3 wolves show up and then start reproducing. So initially we were trying to count every single wolf in the UP, but they were not throughout the entire UP and doing it every winter. So over time, we ended up switching to every other winter. We actually alternate it with our moose survey. And then now we sample about 60% of the UP each year. So we take the UP is broken down into 21 different survey units and then kind of stratified or grouped based on what historic wolf density has been in those areas. And then we'll take a random sample out of each grouping. So it's just kind of a way that we can survey, over half the UP, but not have to try to pull off, surveying every wolf in the entire UP. But anyways, because it's done in the winter and because we're trying to count every wolf in an area, in those sampled units each year, it produces a minimum population estimate, which is really good for when we're trying to evaluate whether we've reached our federal or state recovery goals. So especially early on, it was probably the most appropriate way to estimate our wolf population. Now that we're getting into, we've had a stable population the last 10 years, we're well above those recovery criteria. We actually have a new research project in place to look at a couple different alternative methods for surveying wolves and producing an estimate for the UP. So one of those would be a kind of a different style of winter track survey that would give us a less conservative estimate, but still, during winter when wolves are at the lowest point in their annual population cycle. So of course, every spring pups are going to be born, and then you're going to have pup and adult mortality throughout the year until they reach their next lowest point the following winter. So that would be, I think, a step in the right direction, maybe more useful for our current, management scenario than in the past. So, and that's actually something that Wisconsin has moved towards in recent years as well. And then the other technique that we're going to be trying out would be a trail camera based survey. So that's kind of exciting to us because you could do it in the winter, once again, and get a kind of a less conservative estimate of the population. Or you could also do it potentially at other times of year. So we might be able to see, what does wolf abundance in the summer look like and how does it compare to wolf abundance in the winter. So that's, kind of an exciting thing for us. We're planning on running all three of those techniques over the next 5 years or so, and being able to kind of compare them and evaluate them and then make a decision of, which one do we continue on with in the future.
Okay. I'm a little curious though with the trail camera one, how are you able to use that to check the numbers? Because anyone that deer hunts or use trail cameras for that type of thing, that they're not always telling a good story or telling the whole story. So I'm curious as to how you're able to manage those pictures so you're getting to be able to come up with a number of wolves. Sure.
So it would be using a technique called occupancy modeling, and basically, I'm not going to be the best person to explain this, but we have been using it used it on the predator prey study. We've been using it on our deer movement study up here on quite a few different species, getting to try it out. It's been mostly focused on deer, but then we've been playing around with similar setups for bear and other species as well. So basically, you set up a grid over the UP, and the grid cell size would be consistent with or equal to the average wolf territory size, and then you'd have one or more cameras within each of those grid cells. So you're almost detecting presence of wolves or whether that cell is occupied, and you're doing that several times throughout the sampling period, and you can actually produce an estimate that way. So in addition to your cameras that are out there, you'd also have collared wolves, so you'd be able to monitor what is that average territory size over time. Are there changes with other things as well where that survey needs to be tweaked or scaled as things might change. But it actually has been demonstrated for a lot of different species and can be super effective and really nice to work with. So it's a little different, obviously, if you throw out a trail camera, or you have a trail camera and several landowners around you have trail cameras. You might be counting the same individuals. You might, like you said, you might miss individuals, especially if you're at like a baited site versus a trail versus a two track. So we've kind of gotten to play around with different scenarios over the years on these other research projects and mess around with baited versus unbaited setups. One of the nice things about wolves, which is why I think a lot of folks think there's wolves all over the place or higher densities of wolves than some of our other predators is because they love to run roads and trails and anything that is a easy path of travel. And they cover a ton of ground. I mean, they can travel up to 30 miles in a 24-hour period. And so the plan would be to set these up on trails or like 2 tracks or established deer trails, things where wolves are going to be very likely to travel, and so they can be really effective. And that way you're getting less at a bait site. Obviously, if you have a deer come in, it might stay there for an hour and you might get 100 pictures, or it might stay there for 2 minutes and you might get a couple pictures, right? So having a non-baited setup, I think, would be probably even more effective and get less of that sampling the same individual multiple times. But then having those grids scaled to the average territory size ensures or minimizes their chance of getting the same wolf on multiple different cameras, which helps with estimating the population too. So it's kind of it's a newer technique that's been around for a while and starting to get it adapted to different species and different scenarios. And I think it does show, a lot of promise for our UP wolf population.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I figured it would be a little bit more in depth than just throwing a few cameras out and trying to count the number of wolves that show up on it. But I was curious about how you guys, did that.
Yeah. And luckily, we're able to partner with some researchers at different universities that have an expertise in this stuff, right? And how to estimate populations and monitor different species over time, trying out all this new technology. And so we'd be able to partner with folks that have that expertise and could bring that to the table as well, which is what we're doing. They're actually partnering right now with the State University in New York. Researchers there that we've been working with on these other research projects in the UP, and have gotten to kind of fine tune, what would be effective, what would work for wolves up here.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I mean, I think we covered quite a bit, and I've kept you on the phone for quite a while, so I think I should probably let you go so that we can get on with the rest of your day. But I guess if people were wanting to find out more or had any additional questions, where would you send them to get some answers?
Yeah, I mean, we have our website, michigan.gov/wolves.
So that's it for the conversation with Cody.
Information on there.
Thank you again, Cody, for coming on.
If you're a dog hunter, you're concerned about wolves or trying to minimize risk to your dogs, there's maps on there of confirmed dog depredation locations, hunting dog depredation locations. So there's some really good information on there that will hopefully be
put back on the endangered species
of use and
so a couple things
to folks that are interested. Or I mean, they could certainly reach out to me as well.
Did make it clear that the stance of the state, and I guess for the DNR, they are not in favor of keeping the wolves on the endangered species list, which is not really much of a surprise. States want control of their natural resources, and they want to be able to manage them as they see that they should. And the other part is that Cody he's a biologist. He works within the DNR, and it is hard. I can understand that it's hard for him or for the department to really give hardened numbers on how many particular animals of a certain species needs to be there. And he did bring up an excellent point about the wolf management plan. As I talked to him, I kind of got refreshed in my memory about some of the stuff that's brought up in that management plan, and it does really cover. It doesn't really specify on how many wolves in certain areas are allowed. It looks at more of interaction with other wildlife, with the ecosystem, with humans, with livestock, and can use that as the blueprint of how to manage the wolf species or to manage wolves given a particular area based on their impact, which the more I think about it makes a lot more sense than having a generic number. So certainly if really wanted to understand what the state has laid out on how they would like to manage wolves, or how what their guideline is for managing wolves, I do encourage you to take a look at the management plan and read through it for yourself. And speaking of management plan, so as I said, there are some updates even since I've talked to Cody, and I did learn a few new things, that there are some representatives that are putting things in motion to help certain states out in regards to wolf management. So the first one here in the state of Michigan, on April 12th, the Michigan State Senate will vote on legislation basically urging the Wolf Management Advisory Council and the DNR to adopt a wolf hunting and trapping as part of the state's management plan. So in reading through that document, it's not really big, at least, and it's basically, from how I read it, it's basically saying that, despite the federal protections of the gray wolf right now, that they would like the advisory council, or the Wolf Management Advisory Council, and the DNR to proceed with developing the plan for the regulations on wolf hunting and trapping within the state. So basically, like I said, how I understand it, they're saying, hey, even though they have federal protection right now, proceed forward in developing that plan so that when we do have the opportunity to manage the wolves again, that we already have the plan in place. That's how I read through it, and that's how I understand it. I may be wrong, but it seemed like a pretty straightforward document there. And then also, some representatives from Wisconsin. So you got Senator Ron Johnson, who's a Republican, along with Senator Tammy Baldwin, who's a Democrat in Wisconsin, along with Senator Cynthia Loomis from Wyoming, and Senator John Barroso of Wyoming, have introduced legislation to return management of the gray wolf populations to the states, and the delisting of wolves in the Endangered Species Act in the western Great Lakes, including Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota, and Wyoming as well, under the Endangered Species Act of 1973. So what all that is saying is that essentially they are bringing up legislation in regards to the Endangered Species Act and some of the rulings that have come through. Primarily, essentially what they're arguing is that based on the Endangered Species Act and how it's read through and how it's been ruled on in regards to the delisting of gray wolves, is that it should not be up for judicial review after it had gone through the District of Appeals. After the first litigation, it kind of set a precedent that because it's gone through the appeals process already once, that it looks like they're arguing that it should not be under additional judicial review. Basically it's saying that the courts are arguing with themselves, and after a ruling has been made, that it shouldn't be questioned again. Again, that one's a little bit more in depth, and certainly I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly if that's how it's being presented, but that's how I kind of interpreted and kind of read through the document. So there are representatives and groups in power that are trying to kind of fight this ruling. I did kind of bring it up to Cody that is there any action being done by the state to kind of fight the ruling, putting the wolves back on the endangered species list. And it looks like there are individuals who are trying to fight this a little bit. So, and I will add links to these different pieces of legislation, so you can take a look at it for yourself if you'd like, read through it, and then certainly if you're in support of what they're doing, let your representative know that they have your support in this regard. So that covers everything I wanted to get through. Now, there are certainly a lot of other things that could be talked about in regards to wolves and wolves management within the state as well as across the country. So there'll probably be more to come, more discussions in the future, but it's time to wrap this one up. So as always, get out there, be safe, and have fun.